Poseidon explained, the god who guarded a cosmic prison. For millennia, we have been told the story of the Olympian gods, of their glorious victory over the Titans, and the division of the cosmos. We know Poseidon as the brother of Zeus, the god of tempests and tides, his fury as boundless as the waters he commanded. But that is the story told on the surface, where the sun's light can still reach. Beneath the waves, in the crushing, silent darkness of the abyss, another truth slumbers. A truth so ancient and so terrifying that the gods themselves conspired to forget it. This is not a tale of a god's reign. This is the story of his eternal duty. This is the story of a cosmic prison, a forgotten horror, and the unwitting warden who was given a crown, when he should have been given a warning. Welcome to Mythos Unveiled. Today, we descend into the depths to uncover the true story of Poseidon, the god who ruled the sea, only to discover it had always ruled him. Our story does not begin in the sun-drenched halls of Olympus, nor in the swirling chaos of the sea. It begins in darkness, a living, breathing darkness, a prison of flesh and divine ichor. It begins in the belly of a father who feared his own children more than any enemy he had ever faced. Cronus, the king of the Titans, lord of the cosmos, sat upon a throne built from the shattered remnants of his own father's power. He had overthrown a tyrant, Uranus, only to become a slave to the very same fear that had consumed his predecessor. A prophecy, whispered on the winds of creation, foretold his downfall, that he, too, would be undone by his own offspring. Fear is a poison that turns even gods into monsters. And so Cronus, the ruler of all he surveyed, devised a monstrous solution to preserve his reign. Each time his wife, the Titaness Rhea, gave birth to a divine child, a new light in the cosmos, Cronus would take the newborn in his terrible, world-shaping hands and swallow it whole. He did not kill them. His act was somehow more cruel. He imprisoned them, keeping them suspended in a timeless, lightless, breathless void within his own divine being. They were trapped between existence and non-existence, aware but powerless, eternal but unborn. One by one, the first generation of Olympians vanished before they had ever truly lived. Hestia, the future goddess of the hearth, her nascent flame extinguished before it could ever burn. Demeter, the mother of harvests, swallowed into a barren and eternal darkness. Hera, the queen-to-be, imprisoned before she could ever claim a throne. And Hades, the one who would one day command the legions of the dead, was given his first bitter taste of an inescapable prison. And then came Poseidon. He was born with the echo of the untamed sea in his soul, the untethered power of the tides flowing through his burgeoning divinity. He took his first breath of cosmic air, a breath filled with the scent of salt and storm, only to have it stolen from him. Before his newborn eyes could truly focus on the light of the world, he was cast into the suffocating gloom of his father's stomach. There, he floated alongside the siblings he had never met, a silent prince in a kingdom of dread. He knew no world but this, no life but this suspended animation. Yet, even there, in that terrible, silent void, he could feel it, a distant pulse, a low, rhythmic hum that was not the heartbeat of his father, nor the faint stirrings of his divine siblings. It was something else, something that resonated with the very core of his being, a call from the outside world, from the deepest, most forgotten parts of the cosmos. It was the sea calling to the sea within him. It was a whisper he could not yet understand, a song of the abyss that would one day become the anthem of his destiny and his doom. The scrolls of the sunken city, fragment I state, before he was the earthshaker, he was the swallowed one. The sea called to him not as a kingdom, but as a cell of equal size, a darkness to answer the darkness he knew. Fate, however, cannot be cheated forever. When the sixth child, Zeus, was born, Rhea's heart, heavy with an eternity of grief, could bear no more. In a desperate act of maternal love and defiance, she hid the infant away on the remote island of Crete. To deceive her monstrous husband, she wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, presenting it to him as their newborn son. Cronus, so blinded by his paranoia and arrogance, swallowed the rock without a second thought, believing his reign once more secure. And so, while his brothers and sisters languished in their fleshy prison, Zeus, the future king, grew. He was nurtured in secret, his strength magnified by the righteous fury he felt for his imprisoned siblings, his mind sharpened by a singular, unyielding purpose: to return, to free his family, and to bring down the tyrant who sat on the throne of the world. The stage was being set for a war that would not just change the balance of power, but would break and remake the very fabric of reality. And from the darkness within Cronus, Poseidon waited, unknowingly, for his release and for the crown of thorns that awaited him in the deep. The day of reckoning arrived not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap that echoed across the cosmos. Zeus, now grown into a god of formidable power, returned from his exile. He did not challenge his father with brute force alone. He had learned that the new age would be won with cunning. With the aid of the wise Titanus Métis, he concocted a potion, a powerful emetic disguised as a celebratory wine, an offering from a long-lost son to his father. Cronus, arrogant and unsuspecting, ever confident in his absolute power, drank deeply. The effect was immediate and cataclysmic. The great Titan choked, his body racked with violent spasms that shook the foundations of his mountain fortress, Mount Othries. And then he disgorged his children. One by one, they emerged from the abyss of his gut, not as helpless infants, but as fully grown gods, their divinity having matured and festered in the timeless prison. They were born of trauma, their first memory not of a mother's touch, but of being freed from a living tomb. And they were filled with a terrible, righteous, and boundless fury. Poseidon was among the last to emerge. He gasped, breathing the free air of the cosmos for the first time since his birth. The world was a riot of light and sound and sensation, a stark, blinding contrast to the monotonous gloom he had always known. He felt the solid earth beneath his feet, the rush of the wind on his skin, and the unquenchable rage burning in his heart. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a warrior. He was a king in waiting. And so began the Titanomachy, the great war of the gods. It was not a battle in any mortal sense. It was a 10-year apocalypse. The cosmos was torn asunder. The sky burned with divine fire. The earth split open in jagged, bottomless wounds, and the primordial seas, leaderless and chaotic, raged against the shores of a world in torment. This was a war of annihilation, where mountains were hurled like pebbles and the very stars were shaken from their celestial courses. In this crucible of creation, the nascent Olympians understood they needed weapons worthy of their cause. In a brilliant strategic move, Zeus descended into the depths of Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes, the one-eyed master craftsmen whom Cronus had also imprisoned, fearing their power. Grateful for their liberation, the Cyclopes set to work, harnessing the raw, chaotic power of the cosmos to forge instruments of legendary might. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolt, a weapon that could shatter mountains and command the very essence of the sky. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, a cap that could render its wearer utterly invisible, a fitting tool for a future lord of the unseen realm. And for Poseidon, they created something unique, something that resonated with his very soul. They took the unyielding metal of the earth's core, cooled it in the heart of the primordial sea, and imbued it with the power to command both land and water. They forged a trident, a magnificent, three-pronged spear that hummed with a power so immense. It felt alive in his hands, an extension of his own will. The Titan's lament, Codex 3, reads, "They gave him the trident, calling it a scepter. They should have called it a key to a lock he did not know existed. For it was not made to command the waters, but to hold the great gate shut." Poseidon wielded this weapon with devastating effect. He became the Earthshaker. A single strike of his trident against the ground could send fissures racing across continents, toppling the mountain strongholds of his enemies. He could summon the fury of the leaderless seas, his battle cry the roar of a tidal wave. His power was raw, untamed, second only to the lightning of his younger brother. He and his siblings, leading the charge of the newly freed gods, fought with the unmatched fury of the long imprisoned. They were not just fighting for a throne. They were fighting for their very existence, for a world free from the suffocating tyranny that had defined their birth. The war reached its terrible, inevitable climax. The Titans, for all their ancient strength, could not stand against the combined, desperate might of the Olympians and their new, divine weapons. They were defeated, overthrown, their golden age shattered into dust. The victors cast them down into the blackest pit of the underworld, Tartarus, a prison so deep, so absolute, that even the gods who now ruled from on high feared to look upon it. The age of the Titans was over. The universe was silent, wounded, and waiting to be remade. The Olympians stood victorious upon the ruins of the old world. But victory is never the end of a story. It is merely the beginning of a new, and often more perilous, chapter. With the cosmos theirs to command, the three great brothers Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades faced a new challenge, one that would define their relationships for all eternity: how to divide their infinite inheritance. They were equals in the war, equals in their suffering, and so they decided to let fate, not might, determine their domains. In a solemn ceremony, they cast lots, allowing the universe itself to choose their paths. The sky, with its endless, sunlit expanse and its seat of ultimate power on the peak of Mount Olympus, fell to Zeus. He became the king of the gods, the ruler of the heavens, the final authority in the new divine order. It was a role he embraced with an easy confidence, as if he had been born for it. The underworld, the vast, shadowy realm of the departed, with all its untold riches and its bottomless sorrow, was drawn by Hades, a grim kingdom for a grim god. He accepted his fate without complaint and descended into the darkness, becoming a ruler feared and respected in equal measure, but rarely seen by god or mortal. And the sea, the final lot, the last third of creation, fell to Poseidon. All of it, the churning, endless, unfathomable oceans that covered most of the world, the calm, sun-dappled surfaces and the crushing, lightless depths of the abyss, the gentle tides and the world-breaking tempests. It was a kingdom without borders, a territory of eternal change, raw power, and profound, terrifying mystery. For a moment, a strange hesitation gripped him. The sky was orderly. The underworld, for all its gloom, had its own grim structure. But the sea was different. It was wild. It was alive in a way that the earth and sky were not. As he stood on the shore for the first time as its designated king, the waves lapped at his feet, and he felt that same ancient whisper he had first sensed in his father's belly. It was stronger now, clearer, more insistent. A voice that was not a voice, a presence that was not a presence. It was a welcome and it was a warning. The chronicles of the first oracle note. The lot was not a thing of chance. The sea had chosen its warden long before the dice were cast. It needed a god of rage and pride, one who would mistake the rattling of his prisoner's chains for the sound of his own power. He accepted his domain. His hesitation was fleeting, washed away by a surge of divine pride. He strode into the water, and the sea rose to meet him. It did not bow before him. It surged, as if in recognition of an equal. The trident in his hand pulsed, not just with his own power, but with the power of the deep, a powerful resonance that he mistook for an oath of fealty from his new subjects. He was Poseidon, lord of the seas, king of the oceans, the earthshaker. He had been a prisoner, and now he was a king. That night, as he stood in the heart of his new kingdom, in a palace he would soon build from coral and gold, surrounded by the silent, swirling currents, he felt a profound and unsettling truth settle upon him. The ocean was not empty. He was not alone in the dark. The whispers were all around him now, rising from the abyss like bubbles of forgotten air. They were a chorus of forgotten things, of memories the water had held since the beginning of time. He was their ruler, yes, but was he truly their master? The crown felt heavy on his head, and the trident in his hand felt less like a scepter of command, and more like a key to a door he was suddenly terrified to open. Poseidon's rule over the sea began as a grand declaration of power. He would not be a passive king, content to let his domain run itself. He would shape it, command it, and make it a reflection of his own tempestuous and magnificent spirit. He built a palace of impossible beauty deep beneath the Aegean waves, a fortress of glittering coral and shimmering gold that no mortal eye would ever see. He took the graceful sea nymph Amphitrite as his queen, and together they presided over a court of Nereids, Tritons, and all the creatures of the deep. Their son, Triton, with his conch-shell horn, became his herald, his voice capable of calming the waves or stirring them into a frenzy. On the surface, he was the very picture of a divine monarch, powerful and revered. But the sea is a realm of hidden depths, and so too was the god who ruled it. His pride was as vast as his kingdom, his temper as unpredictable as a hurricane churning in the open ocean. He became known as a god of contradiction, capable of bestowing the serene calm of a sheltered bay or unleashing the earth-shattering fury of a tsunami. Mortals learned to fear him more than they loved him. They offered him their most prized bulls in sacrifice, whispered his name in prayer before any sea voyage, hoping that his mood would be as placid as a summer morning. They called his wrath the anger of the gods. They were tragically mistaken. It was not his anger. What no one, not even Poseidon himself, truly understood was the nature of his power. Every time his infamous fury was stoked, every time his pride was wounded and he struck the sea floor with his trident, he was not merely creating a storm out of his own will. He was turning the key in the lock. He was striking the bars of the great cosmic prison that lay at the bottom of his domain. The tsunamis that swallowed coastlines, the earthquakes that toppled the proudest cities of men, these were not his direct creations. They were echoes. They were the tremors of the great prisoner stirring in its ageless sleep, its immense, chaotic power leaking through the cracks in its ancient seal, channeled and focused through the trident and the unwitting god who wielded it. He believed he was the source of the storm. He reveled in this awesome power, in the fear he inspired in gods and mortals alike. He mistook the rattling of ancient chains for the roar of his own might. He was a king who did not realize his palace was built atop a dungeon. He was a warden who believed the tortured screams of his captive were his own triumphant battle cry. The other gods on Olympus saw only his arrogance. They saw a petulant, moody brother, an equal who stubbornly refused to bend his knee to the authority of Zeus. They saw a god whose violent moods were a constant danger to the fragile world of mortals. They did not see the truth. They did not see that his volatile nature was a symptom of an eternal, subconscious struggle. He was a man trying to shout over a roar in his own head, a roar he did not even know was there, a constant pressure from below that he could only release through acts of rage. And the whispers continued. In the dead of night, when the ocean was still and black as ink, they would rise from the abyss. They spoke in a language of shifting currents and crushing pressure. They spoke of forgotten wars, of fallen stars, of a time before the Titans had ever drawn breath. They told him he was not a king, but a placeholder. They told him the trident was not a weapon of command, a scepter of his rule, but a tool of containment. He dismissed them as the madness of the deep, the delirious dreams of a god ruling over an endless, lonely kingdom. But the whispers planted a seed of doubt, a dark seed that would one day grow into a terrible, world-altering revelation. The peace of the new world, forged in the fires of the Titanomachy, was a fragile, brittle thing. The war had bound the Olympian brothers together in a shared cause, but the peace that followed would inexorably tear them apart. A deep and abiding resentment, born from their initial imprisonment and fostered by the division of power, began to fester between Poseidon and Zeus. Poseidon, who had been an absolute equal in war, refused to be a subordinate in peace. He would look up from his watery domain to the shining peak of Olympus, see Zeus upon his throne, the self-proclaimed king of kings, and his pride, already a raging sea, would churn into a maelstrom of jealousy. This was not mere sibling rivalry. It was a fundamental clash of cosmic principles, a conflict between two opposing forces of nature. Zeus represented order, the sky, the law, the predictable course of the sun and stars. Poseidon represented chaos, the sea, the untamable, the ever-changing tides, and the unpredictable fury of the storm. Every law Zeus passed, every decree he made from on high, fell to Poseidon like a chain tightening around his domain, an attempt by the sky to dictate the rhythm of the sea. Their most famous conflict, a story told and retold by mortals, was over the patronage of a new, magnificent city in the land of Attica. Both gods desired it, seeing it as a jewel to be added to their celestial crowns. Athena, the wise and strategic daughter of Zeus, offered the people a gift of peace, wisdom, and sustenance. The olive tree, a plant that would provide food, oil, and wood for generations. Poseidon, in a characteristic show of his awesome, untamed power, struck the rock of the Acropolis with his trident, and a spring of salt water burst for the symbol of the sea's might, but ultimately useless to the people. The citizens, wisely, chose the gift of peace and prosperity over the gift of a turbulent, briny sea. The city was named Athens, in Athena's honor. Poseidon's fury was boundless. He felt slighted, humiliated, his raw power rejected in favor of his niece's quiet wisdom. In a fit of pique, he unleashed a great flood upon the Attic plain, a tempest born of his wounded pride. Mortals saw it as the tantrum of a sore loser, but it was more than that. It was the great prisoner below, sensing the discord, the imbalance, lashing out through its warden. The more Poseidon felt his authority challenged, the more he tapped into the chaotic power of the abyss to prove his strength, and the weaker the ancient seals became with each tremor of his rage. Zeus, from his throne in the sky, saw only his brother's petulance and sought to contain it with threats and displays of his own superior power. His attempts to control Poseidon, to force him to submit to the Olympian order, were, in a way, an unknowing attempt to stabilize the cosmic prison. But to Poseidon it was tyranny. The Olympian Schism, Volume 2, states, "The king of the sky sought to chain the king of the sea. One fought for order, the other for freedom. Neither understood they were merely two men arguing on the roof of a cage, oblivious to the great beast roaring beneath their feet." The tension, simmering for centuries, finally boiled over. Poseidon, His heart black with resentment and his mind deafened by the whispers he refused to acknowledge, made a fateful decision. He would no longer be second. He would not just challenge Zeus, he would overthrow him. The sea would rise up and swallow the sky. The warden would abandon his post and storm the halls of the master. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a rebellion that would have catastrophic consequences he could not possibly foresee. The rebellion was not a solitary act. Poseidon, for all his pride, was a canny strategist. He knew he could not face the might of Zeus alone. He found allies in his anger, other gods who chafed under the absolute rule of the Sky King. Hera, the long-suffering wife of Zeus, whose heart was a monument to his endless infidelities, readily joined the conspiracy. And even Athena, the wise goddess of strategy, who nonetheless believed her father's rule had become too absolute and tyrannical, lent her support to the plot. The plan was as bold as it was treacherous. They would strike when Zeus was most vulnerable, in the depths of his divine slumber on Mount Olympus. One night, as the king of the gods slept, his thunderbolt resting by his side, the conspirators moved. Poseidon summoned the deepest, strongest currents of the ocean, weaving them with strands of earthly stone and binding magic, creating chains of impossible strength. They crept into the royal chambers and bound Zeus to his own throne, trapping the lord of the cosmos in a web of his own brother's making. For a breathtaking, impossible moment they had succeeded. The sky was silent. The thunderbolt lay dormant. The throne of heaven was occupied, but its king was a prisoner. But power on Olympus is a shifting tide, and loyalty is a rare but potent currency. Thetis, the gentle sea nymph, ever loyal to Zeus, witnessed the coup. In terror, she raced to summon the only beings who could break such chains. The Centimanes, the monstrous hundred-handed giants, whom Zeus had also freed from Tartarus to fight in the Titanomachy. Briareus, the mightiest of them, stormed Olympus, and with his 100 powerful arms, he shattered the watery bonds as if they were made of glass. Zeus was free, and his fury was absolute, a storm to dwarf any Poseidon had ever conceived. The reckoning was swift and terrible. He punished Hera and Athena, but his true wrath was reserved for his brother. Poseidon, the ringleader, the one who had dared to chain a king, would face the full force of divine wrath. Zeus did not cast him into Tartarus. That would leave the sea without a ruler, a chaos that would destabilize the prison, a risk even Zeus unknowingly would not take. Instead, he chose a punishment designed for maximum humiliation, to break the pride of the sea god. He stripped Poseidon of his divine power, muted the trident, and cast him from Olympus. He was sentenced to a year of mortal labor. He, the Earthshaker, was forced to build the great, impenetrable walls of the city of Troy for the mortal king Laomedon, working side by side with Apollo, who had also been implicated in the plot. He was a god forced into servitude. His hands, which had once wielded a weapon that could shatter the world, now laid stone upon stone, mortal sweat beating on the brow of a being who should have been beyond such frailties. It was in this state of humiliation, in this forced quietude, stripped of the roaring power that had always deafened him, that the whispers from the deep returned. Without the constant noise of Olympus, without the roar of his own might, he could finally hear them. They were no longer a distant, subconscious murmur. They were a clear, cold, insistent voice, speaking a language older than the gods, a language of darkness and pressure. They told him of his true purpose. They told him of the thing he was meant to guard. One night, driven by a terror and a curiosity he could not name, he abandoned his post at Troy and dove into the sea. He did not stop at his now distant palace. He went deeper, deeper than ever before. He journeyed into the crushing blackness of the abyssal plain, a place where no light had ever shone, where grotesque, forgotten creatures scattered from his diminished presence. And there, in the absolute heart of the darkness, he saw it for the first time. It was a seal, a vast circular stone of a material that was not rock, not metal, not anything known to God or man. It pulsed with a faint, sickly, internal light. Runes, ancient beyond even the memory of the Titans, were carved upon its surface, glowing with a power that made his own divinity feel small and fragile, even at its peak. He had found the source of the whispers. He had found the gate of the prison. He did not understand what it held, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled his very essence, that the world was not safe, and he was its only guard. His sentence of servitude eventually ended. His power restored, Poseidon returned to Olympus, the great walls of Troy standing as a monument to his shame. But he was a changed god. The glimpse of the Great Seal had scarred him more deeply than any punishment. He was now a god living with a terrible secret. He was paranoid, his temper more volatile than ever, his infamous pride now a brittle shield for a profound and terrifying fear. He ruled his seas with a clenched fist, seeing threats in every shadow, hearing insults in every whispered prayer. It was in this agitated, fearful state that he encountered the mortal king, Odysseus of Ithaca, on his long and arduous journey home from the very war that the city of Troy was now famous for. The story we are told is that Poseidon's relentless, 10-year persecution of Odysseus was simple vengeance for the blinding of his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. And on the surface it was, but it was also so much more. Odysseus, the clever, resilient king, became the focal point for all of Poseidon's simmering rage, his fear, and his self-loathing. He was a god lashing out, projecting his own inner turmoil onto a mortal canvas. The 10 years of storms, of sea monsters, of relentless, cruel misfortune that plagued Odysseus were not just the calculated wrath of an angry god. They were the uncontrolled, chaotic outpourings of a warden who was losing his grip on his own prison. The great entity in the deep sensed its guardian's instability, its distraction, and it pushed against its chains. The sea's chaos during the Odyssey was the prison shaking. Every storm that threw Odysseus off course was a tremor from the abyss. The Mariner's Codex, final verse, reads, "He did not hunt the man, he hunted the man's hope, for the god himself had lost his own, and could not bear to see it in the eyes of a mortal." Poseidon watched the clever king of Ithaca, a man who, despite every trial, despite the wrath of a god, refused to break. A man who, unlike a god, was the master of his own fate, driven by a single, unshakable purpose, to return home. And Poseidon hated him for it. He hated his resilience, his wit, his unwavering will. Because Odysseus represented everything Poseidon was not: free. The god of the sea was shackled to a secret he could not share, a duty he could not abandon, and a fear he could not conquer. The haunting of Odysseus was, in truth, the haunting of Poseidon himself, a decade-long scream of a god trapped in a gilded cage, forever listening to the monster scratching at the door from the inside. The years following the Trojan War were no kinder to Poseidon. The whispers from the abyss never ceased. They were a constant, maddening hum beneath the surface of his thoughts, a reminder of the terrible secret he bore alone. The memory of the Great Seal was burned into his mind. He had seen it, but he did not understand it. He knew it was a prison, but he did not know the prisoner. And the not knowing was a torment worse than any punishment Zeus could devise. He had to know. The compulsion became an obsession. One day he could resist the silent, insistent call no longer. He left his golden palace, left the concerns of Olympus and the prayers of mortals behind. He descended, The journey into the abyss was a pilgrimage into madness. The water grew heavy, the pressure so immense it could crush the bones of a lesser god into dust. The light of the world above faded to a distant, cherished memory, then vanished completely. This was the crushing dark, the absolute zero of existence, a place that was not meant for light or life. Forgotten things swam in this eternal night, creatures of nightmare, born in the age before the Titans, with too many eyes and too many teeth, bioluminescent horrors that scattered before his divine presence like startled minnows. The silence here was a physical force, a weight that pressed in on him, broken only by the frantic, silent beating of his own immortal heart and the insistent, soundless whisper in his mind. Come closer. See the truth. See what you are guarding. He followed the call, drawn by an invisible current, until he saw it again. The seal. It was larger than he remembered, vast as a sunken continent, its sickly, internal light pulsing more urgently now, like a weak and dying heart. The runes carved upon its surface seemed to shift and writhe in the darkness. No longer just symbols, but a living, screaming warning written in a language of despair. This time he did not hesitate. He was a god of action, not of quiet contemplation. He needed to understand. He needed to face the truth of his existence. He reached out, his hand trembling with a mixture of terror and resolve, and laid his palm flat against the cold, unfeeling surface of the great stone. Part 9. The Vision of the First War. The moment his divinity touched the seal, the world dissolved into a maelstrom of non-being. He was no longer in the sea. He was no longer himself. He was adrift in a memory, a vision so ancient it predated time itself, a memory held by the stone and the sea. He saw the cosmos in its raw infancy. He saw the Titans, not as the tyrants of his memory, but as young, powerful, and utterly terrified gods. They were not fighting each other for thrones or power. They were fighting for their very survival. Their enemy was nothing, and everything. It had no shape, no form that his divine mind could comprehend. It was a sentient abyss, a living void, a hunger from the cold spaces between the stars that had been drawn to the new, vibrant energy of creation. It was the Deep One, the abyss incarnate. It did not conquer. It consumed. It did not kill. It unmade. It was the antithesis of existence. He watched in horror as the Titans, led by a younger, less paranoid Cronus, waged a war of utter desperation. They hurled nascent galaxies at the void, but the galaxies were swallowed without a trace. They wove the fabric of light into weapons of immense power, but the light was extinguished, snuffed out like a candle in a vacuum. The horror was absolute, for how do you fight an enemy that is the very concept of nothingness? He saw their final, desperate act. They knew they could not destroy it, but perhaps they could contain it. Using their combined might, they lured the Deep One to the newly formed world, into the deepest trench of its primordial ocean. Then, in a cataclysmic act of sacrifice, several of the greatest Titans poured their own life force, their very essence, into forging a lock. The Great Seal. They imprisoned the void at the bottom of the sea, burying it, hiding it, and then, in a collective act of divine trauma, they rewrote their own history to forget the terror they had faced. They built their golden age on a foundation of buried horror, choosing a lie of serene power over a truth of narrow survival. And the trident, the vision, showed him its true creation. It was not a weapon of war. It was the key, the one tool capable of channeling enough cosmic energy to activate and reinforce the seal from afar. It was a tool of maintenance, a warden's instrument, passed down from the first Titan king, to Uranus, to Cronus, and now to him. The vision faded. Poseidon reeled back in the dark water, his mind shattered by the weight of the revelation. His entire existence, his identity, his pride, his Rajet had all been a lie. He was not the king of the sea. He was its jailer. His kingdom was a prison. His scepter was a key. His famous, terrible power was just a shadow, a faint echo of the true, terrifying might that he had been tasked, unknowingly, to contain for all eternity. He stood before the Great Seal, the truth a cold, heavy weight in his soul, heavier than the crushing pressure of the abyss. He finally understood everything. The whispers, the fear, the uncontrollable, chaotic rage of his domain. He understood his grim, thankless purpose. He was the guardian, the first and last line of defense between the vibrant, living cosmos and the all-consuming silent void. He should have turned away. He should have returned to the surface, strengthened the wards with his new, terrible knowledge, and accepted his grim duty with the solemnity it deserved. He should have made peace with Zeus, explaining the terrible secret they all unknowingly protected. That would have been the wise, the noble, the heroic thing to do. But Poseidon was still Poseidon. Centuries of resentment, of feeling like a second son, of being humiliated at Athens and cast down at Troy, all of it churned within him. He looked at the seal, and he did not just see a prison for a cosmic horror. He saw a weapon. He saw the source of a power that would make Zeus's lightning look like a child's sparkler. The whispers from the seal changed. They sensed his anger, his pride, his deep, festering wound. They no longer spoke of duty. They now whispered of power, of vengeance. They cast you out. They mocked you, but you hold the key to their undoing. Free me, and they will all kneel. The sky will bow to the sea. You will not be a warden. You will be a king of a silent, empty universe. It was a temptation born from a lifetime of wounded pride. A terrible choice between a thankless eternal duty and a moment of absolute world-ending supremacy. He thought of Zeus on his shining throne. He thought of the stone walls of Troy. He thought of the laughter of the other gods as they watched him, the earthshaker, reduced to a common laborer. His tragic flaw, the same untamable arrogance that had defined his entire existence, made the choice for him. He would not be a jailer any longer. He raised the trident high, the key humming with a power he now fully and terrifyingly understood. He roared, a cry of defiance not against a single king, but against his very fate, against the role the cosmos had assigned him. And he struck the Great Seal, not to reinforce it, to break it. A crack, thin as a hairline, spread across the ancient stone. A single, pure note of sound, like the shattering of reality itself, echoed through the abyss. And from the crack, a tendril of absolute blackness, a darkness that consumed light, slithered out. The whispers turned to laughter, a deep, cold, triumphant sound that shook Poseidon to his very core. He had made his choice. He had unleashed the end of the world. The moment the seal was breached, Olympus felt it. High on his throne, Zeus felt a tremor not in the earth, but in the very fabric of existence. The sky above the mortal world darkened without a cloud in sight. The winds, once his to command, howled with a voice that was not their own, a voice of primordial fear. Hades, in his gloomy underworld, felt it too. The river Styx stopped flowing. The very souls of the dead trembled, not in fear of their judgment, but in fear of their complete and total unmaking. And the sea rebelled. Storms erupted across the globe, not with the familiar, passionate fury of Poseidon, but with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The waves were no longer water. They were liquid shadow. They did not crash. They consumed. Cities along every coastline were not flooded. They were erased, pulled into a churning abyss without a sound. Poseidon, floating in the deep, watched in abject horror as the consequences of his actions unfolded. He had expected to command the beast. He had expected to wield its power. He was a fool. The Deep One emerged from its prison. Its form was madness to behold, a shifting, writhing vortex of non-existence, a hole in reality given a will of its own. It was the void made manifest, and it was hungry. Poseidon tried to command the sea. He raised his trident, shouting commands that once shook the world. But the waters did not obey. They turned on him. The currents, once his servants, now became chains of crushing pressure, dragging him down, pulling him toward the maw of the thing he had freed. He was no longer the god of the sea. He was its first meal. The Deep One turned its non-gaze towards the surface world, towards the light, towards creation. It was rising, Poseidon broken and powerless, his divinity being stripped away by the very domain he once ruled, finally understood the true depth of his mistake. This was not a power to be wielded. It was an end to be endured. He had not freed a weapon. He had opened the grave of the universe. Part 12. The God who became the lock. The gods of Olympus descended, a storm of gold and light against a rising tide of absolute darkness. Zeus and Hades, their eons-long rivalry forgotten in the face of total annihilation, fought side by side. The sky and the underworld against the sea. The battle was a cataclysm beyond all reckoning. Zeus's lightning tore holes in the ocean, only for the holes to be filled with more darkness. Hades unleashed the legions of the dead, only for them to be unmade, their very essences dissolving at the touch of the void. The gods, for all their power, were losing. They were fighting entropy itself, and it was a war they could not win. From the depths, Poseidon watched the world he knew being devoured. He saw the desperation on his brothers' faces. He saw the cosmos unraveling because of his pride, his jealousy, his monumental, tragic mistake. And in that moment of ultimate despair, a new feeling rose within him, displacing the rage and the pride that had defined him. It was acceptance, and it was resolve. He had broken the lock. Only he, with the key, could hope to fix it. Summoning the last vestiges of his divine strength, he fought against the abyssal currents that held him. He surged upwards, a comet of fading light, towards the heart of the Deep One, his trident held before him not as a weapon, but as a focus. The beast barely registered his presence, a gnat in the face of its infinite hunger. He would not fight it. He could not. There was only one way. With a final, silent prayer to a world he had doomed, Poseidon turned the trident upon himself. He drove the three prongs deep into his own divine chest. The ocean screamed, not with the rage of a storm, but with the agony of a dying god. His divine essence, the very being of the Earthshaker, poured out of him, not as blood, but as pure, binding, creative energy. His life force became a torrent of light in the heart of the darkness, a current of existence that the Deep One could not consume. His essence flowed into the sea, into the shattered seal, weaving itself into the cracks, forging new runes of sacrifice and containment. He was becoming the new lock. His immortal soul, his very being, was becoming the new prison. The Deep One roared in fury and frustration as the light of his sacrifice pushed it back, as the sea itself, now infused with the will of its dying god, turned against it, pulling it down, back into the eternal darkness of the abyss. The new, living seal of Poseidon's sacrifice closed over it, silencing its rage. The storm ceased. The black waves calmed, returning to their natural blue. The sky cleared. The world, scarred and wounded, breathed again. Poseidon was gone. His name, once feared and revered, became a whisper in the tide. Sailors would still pray to him, but they were praying to an echo, to the memory of a god who had paid the ultimate price. The sea was calm now, but it was a deep, sorrowful, and eternal calm. The ocean had claimed its warden, and in its silent, endless depths, it kept his final, terrible secret. The war was over, for the prison now had a new and eternal guardian. The story of Poseidon, as it is remembered, is not one of a king, but of a warden. A tragic hero whose greatest flaw was the very pride that made him a god. He was given a duty he never asked for, a power he never understood, and in the end, he made the ultimate sacrifice to correct a mistake that shook the foundations of the cosmos. The sea is vast, and its secrets are deep, and sometimes the greatest legends are not the ones we tell, but the ones the ocean keeps for itself. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the abyss. If you were captivated by this untold story from Mythos Unveiled, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the forgotten corners of legend. Let us know in the comments which myth you want us to unveil next. Until then, listen closely to the whispers on the wind, and always question the stories you've been told.